think about this. This is a ball that was hit 480 feet from home plate, and neither runner was able to advance. Ordinarily, a guy from first base might have been able to score on that play.
Right.
But that's the kind of a throw that Willie made back to the infield.
Wow.
Bill, this is Tim Leonard. I wanted to compliment you first of all, because obviously you weren't there at the time. I don't know how old you were in 1954, but I really like the way how you take readers into the clubhouse and retell those stories as if you were doing the interviews yourself. I just thought that was a nice touch in the book. One thing that I wanted to ask you, because I was reading the part, obviously George Weiss and Bill Veeck didn't get along at all. But the one thing that I wanted to touch on with you, because you wrote about the whole incident with Kansas City and how that team was sold, but how it didn't go to Veeck. But you also mentioned then that with Weiss and the Yankees and the American League so focused on keeping Veeck out, that it allowed the Dodgers and the Giants kind of an open door to go out west.
Right.
And
exactly.
it made me wonder. I mean, would the Yankees have made that move?
Would made what move?
Would they have gone west? I mean, was that ever a possibility? Because
no.
That was the first thing I thought when I read this was, is he intimating that the Yankees might have been the team to go west?
No, what happened was Veeck owned the St. Louis Browns, and they were forcing him out of the game. He was going bankrupt in St. Louis, and he had to sell the team. First of all, he tried to move the team. He tried to move it to Milwaukee. He was blocked there by the Braves, who were in Boston at the time, and they had their sights on Milwaukee, and they owned that franchise there. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't go to Milwaukee. Then he tried to go to Baltimore, and they took 2 votes on him moving to Baltimore, and he was turned down both times by the American League. And then they wound up moving the Browns to Baltimore anyway, but Veeck couldn't be the owner. It was bought by a local consortium in Baltimore. So they blocked him from both of those places. And then the following year, in the fall of '54, the Philadelphia A's were up for sale. Connie Mack was 92 years old or something at the time, and they were bankrupt also. And Veeck tried to get involved in buying the A's, and he was blocked, of course, there. And they wound up moving the Athletics. The Athletics were bought by a guy named Arnold Johnson, who was a friend of the Yankees co-owner Del Webb. Johnson had previously bought Yankee Stadium from the Yankees. So he was the owner of Yankee Stadium, even though he was a guy from Kansas City. Now he winds up, through the help of the Yankees, getting the A's franchise from the Macs and moving them to Kansas City. And so by doing so, Veeck, if he'd have gotten the A's, he would have moved them. He wanted to move them to Los Angeles. And he thought he had an ally in Del Webb, the Yankee co-owner, because Del Webb had a lot of hotel interests in Los Angeles and a lot of other interests out there in California. And what he didn't know was that Webb didn't care about that. He hated Veeck. He wasn't about to let Veeck get the team and move him to Los Angeles. So by moving the A's to Kansas City and the Orioles to Baltimore, 2 of the smallest markets in baseball, the American League left wide open for the National League to move to be the pioneers, to move to the West Coast, to San Francisco and Los Angeles. And that's exactly what happened 4 years later.
Mm-hmm. Bill, one of the things you give in the book is how the Bums name and image came to the Brooklyn Dodgers, which I thought was very interesting. How did you find out about that story? It's a very cool story about how they became the Bums, so to speak.
Well, Willard Mullen, the famous cartoonist for the World Telegram, I had always admired his work, and I did not know the man personally, but anybody who's ever seen Willard Mullen's artwork and his cartoons, they're just priceless, and they are so much a part of baseball history and lore. Anyway, I knew his sports editor at the World Telegram. He was one of my bosses when I started out in this business at UPI, and he had told me the story about how Willard actually created the Brooklyn Bum. And what happened was Willard Mullen was in a taxi cab one day in Brooklyn. He had just left the game the Dodgers were playing to go back to his office and start doing his cartoon. And the cab driver turned to him and he said, "How did them bums do today?" And he said it in sort of an affectionate way, but sort of in a disparaging way as well, because the Dodgers at that time had a long history of losing and being a bumbling team throughout the 30s and early 40s. So anyway, Mullins he hears this cabbie say this to him, and a light bulb goes off in his head, and he goes back to the office, and he starts going through his picture files to look for a picture of Emmett Kelly, who's a classic bum who was at all the circuses in New York cleaning up after the elephants and stuff. He was part of the circus acts.
Right.
He was a famous caricature bum, Emmett Kelly. And so he took this picture of Emmett Kelly and he dressed it up. He put, he put a pinstripe pants on him so he looked like he had baseball pants on, and the hat and everything else, and therefore became the creation of the famous Brooklyn bum, which we actually, I guess they don't use it in Los Angeles.
Not anymore, no, but
it was a classic.
We're talking with Bill Madden. He is the author of 1954, The Year Willie Mays and the First Generation of Black Superstars Changed Major League Baseball Forever. It's published by DeCapo Press. And let's talk about Willie Mays. When you interviewed him, the first thing he says, "I don't want to talk about race."
Yeah, well...
Sort of takes away from your theory a little bit. But in the same way, I think it's Willie also, isn't it?
Well, it was, and it kind of explains why Willie Mays was so beloved by his teammates and why, by contrast, Jackie Robinson was not beloved by his teammates. And the reason I say that is because Jackie, when he broke the color line, he knew that he was going to have to be a crusader. He had no choice in the matter. He was the guy that Branch Rickey chose to make this historical breakthrough in baseball. And for the rest of his career, he was going to have to be setting an example and for furthering of integration of baseball. When Willie came along, by contrast, Willie was just a young kid out of the fields of Alabama, poverty in Alabama. He grew up in just outside of Birmingham, and he came into baseball, and he had this great natural ability to do everything. He could hit, run, throw, hit for power, everything. He was the consummate five-tool player, and all he wanted to do was play. He didn't really get involved in any of these. He didn't have to really put up with any of the stuff that Jackie put up with,
right,
because he was protected by his teammates. They realized this was a precious gift that they had with this guy that came to them, just a pure ball player.
Do you think that because Robinson came up at an older age, that was also part of it? He'd already been through a...
Definitely. There's no question. Jackie had been... Willie played in the Negro Leagues, but again, even in the Negro Leagues, Willie was protected by his manager, Piper Davis, who was friends with his father back in Alabama. And so when he went to the Negro Leagues, he went specifically to play on Piper Davis's team, the Birmingham Black Barons.
Right.
So he was always protected from all of this, whereas Jackie went to college in Southern California, and, he put up with stuff there, and then he had to put up with it even when he was in the Negro Leagues. So, and then, of course, when he broke into the majors. So this was the difference, and I think Willie maintained that throughout his entire life. He never wanted to get involved in racial controversies and things like that. That just wasn't him. And I think because of that, that's another reason why his Giants teammates, the Southern Whites in particular, so embraced him.
Right.
Because they felt comfortable around him. They felt like they weren't going to be any of these confrontations, and there weren't going to be these other, issues, social issues that Jackie always kind of forced on his Dodger teammates. And there's a whole lot in this book about Dick Young, who was my boss and mentor at the
I was
Daily News.
just about to bring him up. Out of all, you do mention other writers in the book, but there's many pages that mention Dick Young's name. As a writer, what was he progressive towards integration, or what was his deal?
Well, he was progressive to a point. He certainly fought for it. He wrote as far as what the necessity of it. But when it came to, further pressing on with social issues, he and Jackie, he was basically one who would tell Jackie, look, I'm with you on this, but, you've got to take it slowly, because if you don't, you're going to cause resentment towards you and towards what you're trying to fight for here. And that was Young's belief. Whether he was right or not, I don't know. But I think he was somewhat right, because, as you read this book, the times in the 1954, it's amazing how the times were at that point, as far as what you would have thought would have been, major progress that this country had made in regard to integration and racial issues, but it hadn't. I mean,
Right.
It might as well have been in the 20s. It was, this is long before Martin Luther King. So, anyway, Young and Robinson had this love-hate relationship with each other. They respected each other, but they fought like cats and dogs on this throughout the book, and even up until the late 60s, when there's a great exchange of letters between Jackie and Young in the book, where Jackie got up in arms over Dick's. Dick wrote a column about apartheid in South Africa and the protest of the Olympics in 1968. There was a protest about allowing South Africa into the Olympics because of their apartheid situation, and Young wrote a whole column about how politics shouldn't enter into the Olympics, and Jackie took offense to this and wrote him back and told him, he said, you're bringing up all the old issues, and he insinuated that Dick was bigoted, and that got Dick. Well, like I say, you got to read the book.
Yeah, definitely.
Letter Back to Jackie is a classic.
Yeah, Dick Young was not one to back down from a fight.
No.
Bill, we only have a few more minutes, and I love the book, but I wanted to bring up something I read a couple of weeks ago about Don Zimmer. I know you wrote a book with Don. Two books, I'm sorry. And there were 3 articles you wrote in the Daily News. There was the recap of his life. Then the third one was the one where you talked about what the teams did in memory of him. But the second one seemed like a very, very personal one. What are your memories of Don Zimmer? Because he seemed like this guy who it was just a great baseball guy that you couldn't hate no matter what.
He was the consummate baseball guy. That was his whole life. As I think I wrote in that column, Don, talk about social issues.
Yeah.
Don didn't believe, he didn't know about social issues. He didn't know about world events. He didn't know about politics. He didn't know about the stock market. All he knew about was baseball and horse racing. And those were his 2 passions. And he was, we had a lot of great times together. When I did his autobiography, I told him at the time, I said, look, you're like this little big man. And he looked at me like, who's that? If you may remember the movie Little Big
Yes,
Man.
yes.
Dustin Hoffman plays this old Indian chief that was there for all the major events, kind of like Forrest Gump. And I told him, I said, this is you over the last 50 years of baseball. You've been there for everything. You were an original Met. You were a 55 Dodger. You managed the Red Sox. You managed the Cubs. You were Torrey's bench coach. All of these major events, you were there. And this is a book that I think you need to write, but it's going to not just be about your life, but about the history of baseball over the last 50 years, told by the guy who was right there. And we did this book, and we had so much fun together doing it. It was, what can I tell you? I mean, he was just a dear friend.
Well, that article I felt was very touching. It was very, you can tell you liked the guy and you were friends with him, and it was a nice article to see in the paper. I just wanted to let you know.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, Bill, we want to thank you. The show is over. It's we've had you on for 25 minutes, and we appreciate it.
Okay, great.
We've just been talking with Bill Madden. He's the author of 1954.